Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the radioactive trace. Now look, you probably already know the terrifying lore of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. We've all heard it. But today, we're not just telling campfire stories. We are going to use foundational physics to decode literally the single most sensationalized part of this entire mystery.
To really understand why this case has fueled over half a century of, quite frankly, wild conspiracy theories, I'm talking everything from UFOs to secret Soviet weapons tests, we have to start right here. This quote was the actual conclusion written in the final report by the lead investigator, Lev Ivanov. He wrote that the hikers died from an, quote, unknown compelling force. I mean, imagine waiting for an official coroner's report and getting a sci-fi movie pitch instead. With an official verdict sounding like that, it's really no wonder people's imaginations ran completely wild, right? So the question is, how can simple, everyday physics explain the unexplainable? Well, today, we're stripping away all that paranormal hype, and we're looking strictly at the 1959 lab results. Because, as you'll see, when you apply modern physics and look at the actual forensic data, that unknown compelling force starts to look a whole lot more earthly.
Now, we all know the grim details of the case itself. The slashed tent, the sub-zero flight into the night, the inexplicable trauma they suffered. These were highly experienced hikers, yet something drove them out into the brutal winter. But honestly, among all that chaos and tragedy, there was one incredibly strange forensic detail that just completely baffled the Soviet investigators at the time.
And that brings us to the biggest question of all. Why on earth was their clothing radioactive? A radiologist out of Sverdlovsk named Levashov tested the victims' clothing and organs, and his findings basically became the absolute centerpiece for decades of alien and military cover-up theories. It's that one clue that keeps internet sleuths up at night for sure. But to understand what Levashov actually found, and crucially, what he missed, we need to take a quick, painless crash course in nuclear physics. Okay, so physicist Igor Pavlov breaks the radiation at Dyatlov Pass down into three really simple mechanisms: contamination, emission, and exposure. If we can grasp these three steps, the entire mystery completely unravels. So let's jump right into step one. As one nuclear safety expert puts it, you should really think of radioactive contamination just like dust. If you walk into a dusty room, your clothes get dusty, right? If you brush up against someone else, that dust transfers over to them. Radioactive isotopes don't just magically jump through the air from one sweater to another simply because they're close. They transfer physically, by direct contact or by environmental fallout, like rain or snow. So this means the radiation on the hikers' clothes was an actual physical substance sitting directly on the fabric. Which leads us to step two, emission. Once an object is contaminated with that radioactive dust, that dust starts sending out these tiny radiation particles. And guys, this is the absolutely vital piece of the puzzle. Emission is the only thing Levashov could actually measure in his lab back in 1959. He couldn't measure how the dust got there in the first place or how it impacted the hikers' bodies. He could literally only measure the particles that were actively bouncing off the fabric. Now, interestingly enough, he only detected beta particles. And conspiracy theorists absolutely love this fact, claiming that the lack of gamma rays proves there was some secret exotic weapons test. But the reality is way less cinematic. His 1959 Geiger counter just wasn't sensitive enough. The radiation levels were actually so incredibly low that any gamma rays that might have been present simply fell way below his machine's threshold. Basically, he didn't find gamma rays for the exact same reason your bathroom scale isn't going to weigh a feather. To properly read the actual lab report, we just need to know one specific metric: CPM, or counts per minute. You can just think of it as a speedometer for radiation. It's simply the number of radiation particles hitting the detector every single minute. Simple enough, right? So keep that metric in the back of your mind as we dive into the actual numbers that absolutely terrified the Soviet investigators.
Before measuring the hikers' clothes, Levashov had to measure the background radiation in his lab just to get a baseline, and he got a reading of 90 to 100 ppm. Now, this is totally normal, harmless background noise. We're talking radiation coming from building materials, the Earth itself, even cosmic rays from space. It's completely safe. So this 100 ppm is our standard for normal. Anything significantly above this number means we have a contaminated object.
All right, so here is where the panic set in. You have our tiny baseline of 100 CPM. Then you have the strict Soviet safety limit for people actually working directly with radioactive materials, and that was set at 5,000 CPM. And then you have hiker Ludmila Dubina's brown sweater, which spiked at a massive 9,900 CPM. That is nearly double the safety limit for a literal nuclear worker. When investigator Ivanov saw this huge spike, he immediately classified the case, thinking they had stumbled onto some sort of nuclear incident. But see, here's where history gets completely distorted. If you read the blogs and forums, they usually say that only 3 pieces of clothing were radioactive, supposedly proving that someone was attacked with a targeted weapon. But honestly, that is a massive misunderstanding of the actual lab report. In reality, all 9 clothing samples they tested were well above the 100 CPM background level. They were all radioactive. It's just that only 3 of them crossed that arbitrary 5,000 CPM safety threshold. The entire group was covered in this low-level radioactive dust. So where did this dust actually come from? Well, earthly sources. First off, the hikers' organs showed potassium-40, which sounds super scary until you realize it's just a naturally occurring isotope found in literally all of our bodies. Plus, let's not forget, 2 of the hikers actually worked at the Chelyabinsk 40 nuclear facility and very likely brought contaminated gear from home. Oh, and there were also atmospheric nuclear tests happening at Novaya Zemlya, just 850 miles north, dropping trace fallout right into the snow they were trekking through. So what's the verdict? When modern radiologists look at this exact data today, they don't see some terrifying mystery. They confirm that the beta particle decays cited in that 1959 report were nowhere near dangerous or alarmingly abnormal levels. For this to be considered a deadly weapon or a lethal exposure, the radiation would have had to be 50 to 100 times higher than what was actually found on that brown sweater. That unknown compelling force wasn't a death ray at all. It was just a tragic misunderstanding of environmental background noise and limited 1959 technology. It's honestly amazing how understanding just 3 basic physics concepts can completely defang one of history's most terrifying mysteries. If simply looking at the data the right way can solve the Dyatlov radiation, well, what other famous mysteries are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for a little bit of science to clear them up? Keep questioning the data, and we'll see you next time.